Hello and welcome to today's beginner's watercolor tutorial. I'm Bill Holcomb and today I'm going to guide you through painting this easy atmospheric landscape. All you need is watercolor paper, some round and flat brushes and three colors. So let's get painting. Once my initial colors have been mixed in the palette, I start with my mop brush with some clear water over the whole of the sky down to the horizon level. And bear in mind that in this atmospheric watercolor landscape, we're aiming for a very subdued lighting finish. So my colors are quite weak to enable me to achieve that subdued lighting. And you will see that I'm leaving gaps here and there in the sky area in particular, where a little bit of the sunlight is coming through, but in a subdued way. Continue to use your mop brush at this stage, because you want it free flowing and large washes. As always, my board is at a slight angle, sloping from the top to the bottom. Something like a 20-25 degree angle will be sufficient. And always remember to have some tissue to hand and mop up the edges before using your hairdryer so you avoid creep back. Then I've gone to a smaller brush, something like a number 6, a round, and I'm laying in some of that weak yellow. Border distance there, sort of middle ground. And you can lay some of the green mixture in with that, let it fuse together. Still very light, very subdued. We'll get a little bit stronger later, but it's important that the atmosphere that we're creating is subdued for this particular painting. In my tutorials, I like to teach variation in various techniques. That's why I've chosen this one. Then you can, once you've dried that off, you can go to a smaller brush. You can choose your number 4 or your number 2, whatever you're comfortable with. And we've got that light grayish, bluish grayish color. Not strong, very light, for distant tree trunks. And we're not bothering to show the tops of them. There will be branches and foliage coming across in that area at the tops anyway. Some of those will be a little bit stronger than others, therefore your slightly stronger mix can come into use here as I'm demonstrating. And also have one or two at a slant to make it more interesting. Then I've got some pure yellow in that area at the far bank towards the horizon level. And we'll come on to that again later in terms of a little bit of lifting to show light hitting the bank. Drop a little bit of the weak green at the bottom, let it fuse together. Now I'm mixing up some Winsor Blue and alizarin crimson with less water, so a stronger version, less flowing. That is something that you will get used to eventually with transparent watercolor, mixing up the right strengths. Then I'm at the top there mixing up what will be a brownish color. Use your Winsor Blue, Winsor Yellow, alizarin crimson, and you'll get to a brown color. So for the main trunks, I'm using my number 6 brush whatever you have to hand it, whether it's a 6 or a 7, whatever. And brush sizes do vary tremendously according to which make they are, but I'll say what size they are as a general guide for you. So lay down some of that weak greyish colour first, and then whilst it's still wet, same brush, lay on some of the brown mixture, let that fuse together. And we've gone to a much smaller brush to show various branches coming out from trees and have them crooked or overlapping each other, etc., etc. Make them as interesting as possible, avoiding too many straight lines. We will be repeating this process on the right hand side of the picture later. And we will be using our large mop brush to indicate various foliage, etc., but once again in a subdued fashion, so weak washes. The trees on left and right are just slightly touching, as you'll see later as this develops. The right hand side is completed as well. It was no need to show a full video of that because it's just a repeat of the process. But now, importantly, I'm dipping to my weak blue and weak combination blue and red to indicate various foliage on the trees and purposefully leaving various light areas. There are some distant bushes, trees as well, beyond that little yellow bank that I've lightly indicated. Do remember to have to hand some tissue as I'm demonstrating, so you can reduce the intensity of a particular wash that you may have laid down. As long as you're quite quick in that process, you can then achieve the value that you're aiming for. So tone being color, value being the variation within that color in terms of light and dark. Now, still using that mop brush, I did some of the alizarin crimson with the Windsor blue first, and then gone into my brown mixture and letting them fuse together. This is a situation where the painting that we're aiming for is completed enough to tell the story. We're not aiming for massive detail. Then once that's dried off, you can use the side of the brush scraping technique, something like your number 12, with your brown mixture, dark grey mixture, and just scrape the surface of the paper to indicate various clumps of foliage here and there. And that is also the beauty of this Arches 300-pound rough paper. It has tooth, texture, and it enables you to complete this technique. So that's sufficient. You could also use a flat brush, small one here, dip into some clear water and indicate a few little trunks in the distance there that are just catching some light. If that background was darker still, that process would show them up even more. But as I said, we're aiming for something very subdued. Also now, using that lifting technique for the top of the far bank, just run some water with your flat brush across the top, scrape it along, and then use a dry tissue to lift. We've got a little bank on the left and the right. You can do an underpainting of your yellow to start with, and then dip into your green and leave little gaps here and there, and we'll strengthen those banks up later. We're now just over halfway through this tutorial. I hope you agree that in terms of the middle ground and the distance, that we do have a subdued, much more subdued situation in this atmospheric watercolor landscape. Now, still using my flat brush, I'm dropping in some of the stronger green and letting that fuse in with the yellow. That's an important part of watercolor painting, where you fuse various tones and values and let them create a more interesting finish. Then you've got your mop brush and put clear water over the whole of the water area for the river or stream, and then dip into your Windsor blue, the very light Windsor blue, and let that fuse together. Then work up from the bottom with the combination of Windsor blue and alizarin crimson, and just fuse that in. This is quite an easy landscape, so I do feel it's ideal for beginners. There's not a great amount of detail. Then whilst I've still got the paper wet, I'm dropping in some reflections of the main tree trunks. Nothing too complicated. Things will be strengthened up a little bit later, but this helps us establish where things will be in terms of reflections. There'll be some more subdued, distant reflections from the trees on the far bank. Later on, we'll come on to the rocks in the water, which add interest. Now you can drop in little indications of reflections of those far distant tree trunks, bearing in mind that the paper is still wet, so I'm working quite fast before the water wash that I put on earlier dries on me. Just pick those out and think of the angles which those reflections will be. Some are stronger than others, some are very faint indeed. Then you can use one of your flat brushes, a small one, and use that scraping technique for some of the green grasses on both banks, coming down to the water's edge. 3/4 of the way through this tutorial. I think you'll agree it is a very atmospheric watercolor landscape, and certainly with subdued lighting. A lot of the time the paintings I produce are quite dramatic, with very colourful sunrises, sunsets, etc., which is fine. But for variation, I wanted to do this with subdued lighting, and I think it's important for you to try this tutorial so that you can learn these techniques and add that to your repertoire of techniques for your future masterpieces. Then I'm laying in some clear water again, because that section for the river or stream is dry, and I want to continue with building that up. So it's becoming a little bit darker, but I'm importantly leaving as much of the light area in the middle of the painting. So where I laid down those reflections before, I'm now laying down a stronger version. And remember, they will dry much lighter. They look quite strong right now, but once we get the hairdryer on them, dry them off, they'll be much lighter. You can also indicate a few of the branches here and there coming off the main trunks, but I wouldn't overdo that. Just indicate a few like I'm doing. Enough to tell the story. Then after this is completed, we'll be coming onto the rocks, and basically underpainting of the rocks will be that brownish greyish colour to start with, and then we will do some lifting on the top of the rocks where the light is catching. So mix up a brown colour, your three primary colours again, and then you lay down some greyish colour first, and then once that's dried you add this brown mix. And I'm leaving some of the top of the rocks entirely, letting paint fuse up a little bit, because we want those tops to be quite light. And as I said, I'll be coming on with the bristle brush later with some clear water on the tops of the rocks to do some lifting and indicate therefore the light catching the tops of the rocks. And remember to do a few little indications of reflections in the water from the rocks to add realism. Almost complete now, less than a minute to go. Here we go with a bristle brush. Have that clean tissue to hand, lay down some clear water on the tops, scrape it a little bit, which the bristle brush enables you to do because of the firmness of the brush. And if need be, you can resort to a smaller brush, flat brush, to do some of that lifting as well. And here we are, a completed painting, atmospheric watercolor landscape with subdued lighting. Please have a go at this one. Hope you enjoyed that. Look forward to seeing you next time.